Senator Rand Paul. He's a Republican and member of the Senate Foreign Relations and Homeland Security Committees. Senator, good to see you tonight.
Glad to be with you.
It's so horrifying to think about what happened there.
It just kind of reminds you of Malala, you know, being shot point blank for the crime of wanting to get an education. And to me, it's just so hard to fathom. But it also, I think, illustrates that I think that ultimately this has to be civilized Islam needs to step up and say, we're going to take care of this. And it's a long, long war. And I think that's probably where the president's wrong, is that he thinks, well, things are over, everything's fine. And in reality, this is something that's been going on 1,000 years, but probably goes on a long, long time more.
So you think that's the answer, civilized Islam?
Absolutely. I mean, civilized Islam has to step up and be part of the answer, because whenever we try to fix the problems over there, they see us as the infidel, and there's no end to the amount of enmity that will continue. But civilized Islam has to stand up and say this is an aberrant form of a religion, and it doesn't represent our religion.
Does that hold? I mean, you think about what happened in Iraq when we left and there was a vacuum and ISIS exploited it. Civilized Islam didn't exactly stand up there, but if they had, one wonders whether it would have had any effect. I mean, should there be some role for the U.S. military in maintaining a peace?
Well, I think there is a supportive role, but I do think that the people who need to stand up and fight are the Iraqis. The Kurds are standing up. Of all the people in the area, the Kurds actually will fight. So rather than give the weapons, you know, to the so-called moderates in Syria, we ought to consider giving the weapons directly to the Kurds. We have armed the Iraqis quite a bit. The Iraqis do need to step up and fight, though, and that's the question. And I've said repeatedly, I'm not willing to send ground troops back into that. I'm not willing to send my kids back in to fight for cities that the Iraqis are unwilling to fight for.
But what do you make of what we're seeing around the globe right now, from the lone wolf terror attack we saw in Canada, to the hatchet attack we saw on a New York City police officer, to a woman being beheaded down in Oklahoma, to what we see in Jerusalem and Israel every other day, to now Sydney, Australia, now in Pakistan, school children, at a time when the president has said recently that the world is less violent than it's ever been. That could still be true, but is it? What do you think?
There's a great deal of evidence to indicate the president's wrong and just doesn't quite understand the situation. This is a long war. Like I say, it's been going on a long time. Some of it 1,000 years, you know, between the Sunnis and the Shiites, and some of this is still somewhat Sunnis and Shiites, but really more than that, it's an aberrant and barbaric form, really primarily coming from the Sunni wing of Islam. But really, civilized Islam needs to step up.
So is the president doing the right thing? Because he's speaking out to quote civilized Islam, telling them stand up, speak out, and encouraging them to do what you're saying.
Well, you know, even George Bush said somewhat of the same thing. He would often make sure he made a point to say, we're not attacking Islam. This is not a religious war against Islam. There are 1 billion people who belong to the Islamic faith, and you know, this is a small minority. Unfortunately, 5 or 10% of 1 billion is still a big number, and that's the problem. You know, we are talking about a movement that might involve millions of people, maybe 50 to 100 million people, but still the vast majority of Islam doesn't believe this is the right way to go. So we do have to appeal, and people might not like it. They might say, oh, that's weak, but you do need to appeal, and we do need allies. The Iraqis are, you know, their faith is Islam. The Kurds' faith is Sunni Islam. So yeah, we do need all of their help, and ultimately the war is only won by the people who live there.
Let's switch gears. Today, a potential presidential contender, Jeb Bush, announced that he will, quote, actively explore the possibility of running for president in 2016. He says he hasn't made a final decision, but this is a much bigger step than he's taken so far. You have not gone that far yet and said maybe 6 months or so I'll make a decision. Now some people are saying, come on, Senator, make a decision. Why is Jeb Bush out ahead of you?
Well, maybe he has more ground he needs to gain. He's been out of this for a while, so maybe he needs to get back in and practice up a bit. I don't know. I can't determine why other people. I just know what I'm going to do, and
still
that's
6 months out.
Wait a few more months, yes.
What about, you said that that nobody who has said that they're for Common Core could win the Republican primary. That seems to be a direct shot at him, because he's the hugest proponent.
Yeah, I think it'll be very difficult. Most of us believe in less federal government and more decentralized government, particularly with education. You know, Ronald Reagan ran on the platform of getting rid of the Department of Education. We've always believed in decentralized education. So for Jeb Bush to run in the primary will be very, very difficult, because if you're going to be for a national curriculum and for Common Core and for No Child Left Behind, this accumulation of power in Washington, that's not very popular, and it's going to be an overcoming if he thinks he can win the primary.
Another question I have for you is the president's Surgeon General. Now, he has been confirmed in the Democrat-controlled Senate, which it will be Democrat-controlled for a short time longer. Vivek Murthy is now our Surgeon General, and you have had major concerns about him. Why?
This will be the first Surgeon General we have who thinks it's his job to bash the Bill of Rights. He spent a great deal of the last several years bashing guns and calling them a health issue. I really don't think we need a doctor paid for by the government who's going to stand up and lecture us on the Bill of Rights and that he wants to limit the Second Amendment. So we're putting him on notice. If he decides to use the government position of the Surgeon General, which can talk about health, smoking, weight, exercise, all of those are good things. But if he wants to talk about the Second Amendment, we think he's in the wrong position and he should run for office.
He had encouraged doctors to actually speak with their patients about their guns, finding out what kind of guns they own and so on. Could that be stopped? I mean, are you in a position in the U.S. Senate to do anything about that if he pushes that as an agenda?
No, because they got him through. Now, we tried to prevent this from happening, and because of the last couple of days, somehow things got disturbed and we weren't able to prevent him.
Yep.
So now, in January, we have much more power, but right now we don't have the power to stop him.
Wow, we'll continue to follow that. Senator, great to see you.
Thank you.
All the best.
Thanks.
Also tonight, the powerful moment when former President George W. Bush made an unannounced visit